Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 550. It's Labor Day in the United States, and that means kids are heading back to school. In fact, I helped mine move into their dorm room over this past weekend. So it's fitting that we're interviewing someone from a college campus this week. Leah Smith is an assistant professor at the Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. She, along with colleague Annika Abel of the University of Tennessee, recently published a research paper called The Art of Misspelling, Unraveling the Diverging Effects of Misspelled Brand Names on Consumer Responses. Obviously, in the domain name world, we talk a lot about misspellings when it comes to domains, but this research digs into other aspects of misspellings and brands. Certain types of misspellings are easier for people to understand, or at least not as detrimental in the eyes of the beholder. There are also ways brands can mitigate the downside of choosing a misspelled domain name. It's a really fascinating discussion, so stay tuned for that. First, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is salve.com. Transfer your domains to Salve and save. Right now, you can transfer .coms for only $9.65 and .org domains for $10.52. Salve doesn't raise your prices a lot at renewal time. In fact, .com renewals are currently only $10.15. Start saving money today by transferring your domains to Salve. Go to salve.com/DNW/transfer. That's sav.com/DNW/transfer. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I traveled over the weekend to help my kid move into their college dorm. So I'm recording this intro a bit earlier than I do, but there's already some news from the domain business from the past week, so let's talk about that. First up, investors in Tucows have asked the company how recent wins for its Tucows registry business will impact its financials. The company said revenue from the registry, including for operating Indias.in and Radix's domain names, will mostly be evident in gross margin, not in revenue. And this makes sense conceptually. Registry services are orders of magnitude cheaper than registrar services. Tucows didn't disclose its pricing for competitive reasons, but we're looking at something more on the order of $1 per domain compared to $10 to $20 for a typical domain registration. However, other than covering tech costs and overhead, the registry gets to keep all of that money. If Enam, on the other hand, sells a .com domain through its enterprise-level resellers, it collects $11.50 from them, but then has to turn around and pay $10.26 of that directly to VeriSign. In other words, the registry business won't drive much revenue, at least for now, but it should drive profit. Is a Dirty Harry reboot in the works? Last week, Warner Brothers won a cyber-squatting complaint against the owner of dirtyharry.com. The registrant said he acquired the domain for a home-flipping business to, quote, purchase dirty and distressed homes that other developers weren't tough enough to take on and rehabilitate and resell them for profit, similar to how Harry Callahan cleaned up the streets of San Francisco. Yeah, but that story was at odds with him reaching out to the attorney for Clint Eastwood, the star of the movie, and asking him if he wanted to buy the domain. There were other things that made the majority of the panel decide to transfer the domain name. You can read more about this case in a story posted on August 26th. A man named Philip Schilling released some interesting research last week. He owns the domain piranhas.com, and he wanted to see how animal domain names are being used. He discovered that nearly half of animal domains resolve to a business or organization website, and 27% resolve to a for-sale lander. Schilling also found that if you want to buy a plural animal domain name, there are many available for under $50,000. Singular domains, which are more common for brands like hippo.com and zebra.com, cost a lot more than that. Domain marketplace Atom sent out its first trademark monitoring alerts last week. These tell domain sellers if someone recently applied for a trademark that either matches their second-level domain or if that second-level domain is contained in the trademark string. This could be helpful for determining future demand and also making sure there's no language on your landing page that could cause a dispute with a future trademark holder. There are many more stories to read about on Domain Name Wire, including a reverse domain name hijacking decision, a discussion about using GoDaddy's search data that's now available for Afternic-listed domains, and a story about how painful it is to register .us domains these days. The reason for that might surprise you, so go check out those stories and more at domainnamewire.com. And finally, before we get to our interview segment, a reminder to download the Domain Name Wire app. You can find us in the Apple Store or the Android Store, or go to dnw.com/Apple or dnw.com/Android. Every week, you'll get an exclusive expired domain bidding suggestion list, and you also get exclusive access to see the ranking of the hottest stories on Domain Name Wire. All right, now let's talk about misspellings in brand names. My guest this week is Leah Smith. She is an assistant professor at Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Leah, you, along with your colleague Annika Abel at the University of Tennessee, recently published a research paper. It was called The Art of Misspelling, Unraveling the Diverging Effects of Misspelled Brand Names on Consumer Responses. So this research looks into types of misspellings of brands and the impact this has on consumers. Tell me about your background and why you became interested in this topic.
It was pretty simple. I just started noticing how many brands were misspelled intentionally. I think the first one that really jumped out at me, I was taking my dog to get boarded for a trip, and the name of the place was Pets or People Too, but people was spelled with two E's in the middle and the letter R instead of the A-R-E.
Wow.
So it was incredibly blatant misspelling, and it kind of made me cringe.
Yeah.
But I thought, it's okay. He's a dog. They can take care of a dog. But then later I saw a misspelling on the sign for a daycare, and I thought, I would never send my child there because they can't spell.
That was the genesis. That's when you decided to look into this.
That's when I first started noticing it more. And once I started paying attention, there's so many brands out there that are misspelled that we don't even necessarily notice.
Right.
Like Fruit Loops, until you read the word closely.
I didn't realize I was misspelled until I was reading your research report. I'm like, no, this can't be right. I've known that brand for 40-something years since I was a kid and had no idea it was misspelled.
Or same with Chick-fil-A, that we get used to seeing it over and over and don't necessarily process it or recognize immediately that it's a misspelling.
And so you're a marketing professor, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And so this is kind of right up your alley here. And so I think before we kind of dig into the research, it's important to understand the types of misspellings. And one of them people probably don't even think of as a misspelling, which would be kind of a compound word, if you will. So especially my listeners coming from the domain name world, there are no spaces, right? So everything's kind of a compound word. But I think it would help to go through kind of these 9 different misspellings so that people can understand these more, and we can give some examples. So why don't you start with that compound one?
Sure. Compounds are still misspellings because they are not traditionally a compound word you'd find in the dictionary. Microsoft Word is still going to put a squiggly line under it because it's not a accepted spelling of mashing these two words together. So an example is AutoZone. The words auto and zone are spelled correctly, but they're just mashed together without the space in the middle.
Yeah.
Same with Goodyear.
There's a brand in the domain name industry, GoDaddy, that to make things even more confusing, for part of their life, they separated out Go and Daddy, and now they're back to GoDaddy being one word. So
right, exactly.
So that's a compound. That makes sense. What about some of the others?
So as we go through them, then as they deviate more from a correct spelling, then they get harder to process. So a lot of brands will just add an extra letter just by adding an extra R or an extra E on the end. Or in the case of a beauty brand called Deluxe with 2 X's, we don't necessarily notice that it's misspelled, but it's adding an extra letter.
Okay.
Some other examples, foreign misspellings are not necessarily foreign words, but taking foreign characters and substituting them into English words. So they create either adding a vowel with an umlaut or using some kind of special character that's not normally used in English and just kind of forcing it in to and normally what would be an English word.
Yeah. In fact, your example in a report, one of them is Rode microphones, which I'm actually speaking into a Rode microphone. So I see this right here on the side here. I'm looking at it, and it's got the O with the slash through it, which I'm not 100% sure what language.
I think it's Swedish, maybe.
That would be my guess. But all right, so that'd be kind of substituting a foreign letter in there. And what else?
We have letteronyms, which are actually fairly common, which we substitute a letter for a word. So Toys R Us is an example, as a popular example of that, or Lazy Boy, just has the Z instead of the ending Y. They use the Z to substitute that. Anything with EZ.
Oh, yeah, that's a common one. Yeah, common one. Okay.
Or U-Haul is another
U-Haul.
very common one you don't think about.
Okay.
Another example, portmanteaus are similar to compound words, except they kind of merge the two words together. So it's not just a space that makes it okay, but it's usually missing some letters from one of the two words, merging those two together, sort like FedEx is merging Federal and Express. Pinterest is kind of, again, combining a pinboard and interest.
Ah, okay. Okay. Got it.
So a lot of, they're taking parts of words and usually deleting some in the middle. But a space alone doesn't make it okay.
You mentioned Microsoft earlier, and that would be an example here as well.
Exactly.
Which I guess is what microprocessor and software. Yeah. Okay.
Then we get to phonetic misspellings. These are also pretty commonly found. Here's where Fruit Loops comes in as an example. Just how it would be spelled phonetically if you were spelling it out. Same with Ready Whip, that they spell the end with an I instead of READY.
Ah, right.
They spell it REDDI. So they're spelling it as it sounds instead of how it is correctly spelled.
Okay.
The next category is abridgments. And these are when some letters have either been completely omitted in the middle or chopped off the end. So in the middle, we have like the cosmetic brand. It's supposed to be dermatology, but it has absolutely no vowels in it.
Oh, yeah. This has become kind of, you see, for a while, you saw lots of domain names, right? Where the companies couldn't get the domain. And so they're like, we'll just drop the vowels, right? Which is this example, the dermatology.
Yeah. Another example, the cookie brand Crumble is missing the E at the end. So anytime that there is a letter missing, whether it's in the middle or at the end, then we consider those abridgments.
Abridgment. Got it. Okay.
Then alphanumerics are similar to letteronyms, except it's substituting a number in the place of a word. So things like forward, Timbuktu with the number 2 at the end, anything that has actually the letter symbol in place of part of the word.
Yeah, those are particularly tricky, I think, and we can talk more about that. But there's one more type that is probably the most egregious misspelling here. So
they are, and this is probably the least common, at least offline. But we have leet speak as our final one, and that substitutes any kind of letter, number, or special character for parts of words or letters.
Okay.
So using the number 3 instead of an E in a word. So you don't say the number like you do with an alphanumeric. You read it as an E instead of a 3.
I can see why that's the hardest and the worst here. And so you said these 9 are kind of ranked by the challenge, the cognitive challenge of kind of understanding these in order. And conceptually, that makes sense to me, right? Like I get how, swapping the digit 4 for FOR or even for FOUR or, these worse ones, these leet speak, like degrees north, putting a 3-6 in for the EG. I see that makes sense to me how those are most difficult, but you're doing research. Obviously, you need to quantify this in some way. So what did you come up with kind of a way to quantify how misspelled these are?
I started just looking through names and trying to create categories, trying to find categories and getting lists of brand names, driving around, seeing brand names, collecting as many as I could, and then making sure that I had a category for each of them. And when if I found something new that didn't really fit in a category, then I created a new category that best describes it. And in some cases, there are words that span across 2 categories, like the pets are people too, that I mentioned earlier.
Sure.
That was a combination of the phonetic and...
Oh, gosh, just hearing it. It's so bad.
That it was combining 2 different strategies, but at least each strategy or each type of spelling was being applied.
But you have some kind of scoring mechanism here, right? That adds a technical layer to it, right? So talk to me about how this works.
Yeah, when I really had to get into the linguistic literature to understand how misspellings are processed. And I found this measure of orthographic similarity. There's a link to it in the paper that you can go online and type any word and then a misspelled version of that word, and it will calculate a degree of orthographic similarity, how close it is to the correctly spelled version. And it's not just the number of letters or changes that need to be made, because if 2 words So say you start with one word that begins with a C and you substitute a K for it. We pay more attention to the initial letter of each word.
Interesting. Okay.
That's when we first start to read. So the first letter gets weighed more heavily than the last letter. Similar with some of those abridgments, if you're missing vowels, the brain can kind of substitute those in more easily than they can a missing consonant.
Right.
So it's a pretty complex formula, but it does it all for you online, which was wonderful. You can put in the correct spelling of the word itself, and then calculate that degree of orthographic similarity.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing when looking, when companies look for a brand name, just to kind of plug it in there and see, right, how complicated it would be. Because the idea here is it makes it harder, just like that pet brand, it makes it harder for us. Well, first of all, I think you said the word cringe, or maybe that was me. It's almost like it offends you, right? Seeing some of these. But there's also this cognitive load that goes into understanding the brand too, right?
Exactly.
So talk to me about kind of some of your hypotheses going into this research, pulling it together.
Initially, I thought there would just be negative effects. I thought, why would anybody do this? But then the more I talk to people, there's times that it seemed to be okay or more acceptable. And even in the examples that I gave at the beginning between the pet care and the preschool, like I was kind of okay with it being for my taking care of my dog, but I don't trust these people to then take care of my child if they can't spell. So I started thinking there was more situational factors that would make it acceptable. But as I talked to more and more people, I also found other things that they thought made it acceptable. One of my colleagues, for example, said that they mentioned the brand Come and Go, spelled with K-U-M and Go. It's a gas station chain here locally, and how much they hate that. And I said, well, actually, did you know the letters come from the founders' initials?
Oh, okay.
That their initials were K-U-M. It wasn't a reference to anything else. And they said, oh, well, they should say that.
Right.
That makes it okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of the experiments you ran, how you went about it, and what you found.
Yeah. So my first couple of studies looked at just all the different kinds of spelling and severity of spelling to show that when and how much a misspelling will disrupt fluency or how easy it is to process that information. And so that's where I show across the different categories of misspelling that there is differences in fluency, which match up pretty well with the orthographic similarity.
Okay. So you had measured it with the orthographic similarity using this tool, and then you went to real life to talk to individuals and see the fluency of it. Is that
yes? Correct? So I measured their fluency or how easy it was for them to read the name or process the information.
How did you do that?
We did online experiments and experiments also within our behavioral business lab here at the University of Arkansas. So we had student participants in those, and then online we drew into online panels in order to measure this.
And so, how did you measure it? You presented them with a name and then asked them for a reaction, or was there a recall? Or
so I didn't ask recall. Recall has been shown that the more difficult it is to process, that it's actually more memorable. And research has already kind of looked into that. So I wanted to look at purchase intentions. So I came up with brand name examples and said, hey, if you were looking to buy a particular whatever it was, how likely would you be to consider this company? And had them rate their purchase intentions for the company. And then I asked them, okay, look at the name and how easy is that to read on a 7-point scale? How easy is it to process and understand that information?
Got it. Okay.
So I was getting both of their overall intentions. Is this going to turn them off from purchasing, or is it just difficult to read? Kind of both of those pieces of the puzzle.
And you said you found that, so that second part coincided with basically how the scoring had turned out for the most part
It was definitely correlated. There are some differences as people are more accustomed to seeing like C's substituted as K's at the beginning of a word like Krispy Kreme. They've seen it enough times that it becomes a little bit more natural to process. So there was some minor differences, but yeah, generally it followed the pattern.
Okay. Yeah, and I think about this too. We're all looking at this visually, right? Not auditorily. Okay, which opens up a whole other kind of can of worms, especially when it comes to misspellings. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so those were kind of your first couple experiments. And then what did you do after that?
Then I tried to look for ways that fluency can be reestablished. And research has shown there's a lot of different sources of fluency. Things like font size, font type can contribute to fluency. And so I looked also at conceptual fluency, the degree to which the spelling or the name was expected. So in the example that I gave, my coworker hated the name Come and Go, but then it was okay because once they found out that the owner was related to the owner's name, like that gave them a reason to misspell. It made it more expected. So I looked for ways that I could add that, oh, okay, that makes sense kind of idea.
And what are some other things other than the owner's name?
I used the owner's name. I used a category reference. So in one case, I looked at a flower shop named Sentimental Moments, and then testing a portmanteau of that with scent, SCENT, and mental moments, sentimental moments spelled that way. And that was perfectly acceptable. However, when I use that same misspelling for a photographer where it doesn't apply, the scent of the photograph doesn't apply, then it still fell apart and was terrible.
Got it. Okay. What else did you test for and what did you find?
I also looked at visual cues. So in the case of, I have a study where I used the word total.
Yeah.
Total fitness.
This one was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I misspelled it by kind of making it a portmanteau of total and a toad, a little frog, and added a logo with a frog. So when it was spelled incorrectly with the toad and had the frog cue, visual cue, that seemed to, again, give that level of expectancy or that reasoning for the misspelling, which made it okay.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of humorous too. I'm just looking at it right here. This toad lifting up a stack of weights.
Yeah.
So.
I'd also done with a koala and spelling quality as quality versus quality, which was also very cute. But the toad might be my favorite one.
Yeah. Let's see. Were there any other tests you ran? Yeah.
That's pretty much all the studies that we ran.
So let's kind of talk about what this means, right? So are there cases then where misspelling on purpose could actually give your brand a lift, if you will?
Yeah. So it definitely helps the brand stand out, get noticed. See, I still remember where I boarded my dog, even though it's been 7 years ago, right?
Yeah.
We've moved. I don't go there anymore, but it still stands out in my memory. It is helpful to gain that initial attention and to help you stand out and be more memorable. And if you can give people a reason, or if they can easily see a reason why it's misspelled, then it will be easily accepted. Then you get kind of the best of both worlds. Whereas if it's just misspelled for the sake of misspelling, then people tend to have a harder time getting over that hurdle.
Yeah, it strikes me too that in a lot of cases, you need to market it more to get that to stand in your mind. Like if you tell me the ride hailing company Lyft, now I know it has an LYFT. I don't think there is any reason for the Y other than probably LIFT wasn't available as a domain name, probably.
Exactly. Yeah.
But now I'm like, okay, I get that. But that took years and years of impressions in my mind in order for that to work.
Exactly.
And now, look, like Krispy Kreme, I know that begins with a K, but some of these Fruit Loops, I don't think we mentioned what makes Fruit Loops so interesting, right? The OO is, right?
Yeah. When you look at the logo, they actually use the cereal itself as the O's. So they're bringing the product into the name.
Yet still, again, decades of seeing this, I thought it was FRUIT. I had no idea that it was misspelled. So for brands, when they're thinking of a name, would you still say the first choice is to come up with a brand that doesn't have a misspelling?
It depends on what your goal is. If you're trying to be a little bit more memorable, then if you can kind of find a minor misspelling that can also convey some information. Chick-fil-A is combining the words chicken and filet, meaning a high quality meat. So they were trying to make that association intentionally. And yet it's something unique that stands out in consumers' minds. So I would say if they can make that connection, then it's okay to have a minor misspelling.
But beyond that, then your recommendation would be, hey, go with the correct spelling.
Yeah.
And then, I think as this translates to the web, especially for online businesses, there's this extra layer. Like Chick-fil-A, as an example, I don't know just sitting here if it's CHIC or CHICK. And
Right.
so if I'm trying to go to a website, which for Chick-fil-A, again, you're mostly going to drive by and say, oh, I want some chicken. But if you're an online only brand, that adds an extra element there where there's a challenge. And then there's also the auditory challenge of those too. If someone says, go check out my website at Duracell, and I wasn't familiar with the brand, or even Timbuktu for sure, I wouldn't know how to get there, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What would you like to explore? Do you plan to build on this research, and what would you think about doing next?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, I focused on adding information through portmanteaus and phonetic spellings because they're the most malleable. You can be kind of choiceful with the word, with how you spell and what words you combine to add information. So I think it would be interesting to look into some of the lesser used misspellings to understand, is there a way that those could be also used effectively?
It's fascinating research, and it was really interesting when I saw this come across my desk. I was like, hey, that's something that we talk about a lot in domain names. And just thinking about these two, the offline world and the online, again, with like compounds, right? And domain names, everything's a compound, right? So how does it apply there? So it's really interesting. Leah, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking about your research.
Oh, sure. You're welcome.
My guest this week is Leah Smith. She is an assistant professor at Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. Her research with colleague Annika Abel was The Art of Misspelling, Unraveling the Diverging Effects of Misspelled Brand Names on Consumer Responses. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.